Hey guys, my name is Eric Vento. This is yet another podcast of government to private, except this time we're kind of switching things up and we're going to do a podcast on all things HR and hopefully answer some of your foundational questions on talent acquisition and resumes and interviews and best practices on the job search process. You know, I like to tell people that if you ask 10 different people, you're going to get 10 different responses. And that's one of the frustrating things about working in the corporate world. And it can make the transition process really, really frustrating. So, hopefully, to answer some of our questions here today, I've invited a good friend who used to work at AWS, and I've known her for quite some time, but I will allow her to introduce herself. Go ahead.
Hey everyone, my name is Tabayoyong. That is a very difficult name to say, so don't worry about it. I'm currently head of people at uptime.com. We are a website monitoring company. Love what I do. I am the people person basically here at my company. I've supported a lot of tech companies in the past as well. Eric already mentioned AWS. I've also worked for Amazon. I have to separate those two things. A couple of startups, but I feel like this current position I'm in is my home. So, and happy to be here, Eric.
Thank you, Czarina. I'm happy you're here too. And I can't wait to hear the feedback that we get from this, just because the corporate process as a whole is usually really, really frustrating and confusing for a lot of people, but
Mm-hmm.
so for, the type of audience that I cater to, which is the government professionals who are making the transition.
Right.
Especially from an HR perspective, there's a lot of confusion there. And I'm really, really excited to dive into some of those questions with you and just understand from your perspective and your
Mm-hmm.
experience what you consider be a best practices approach in the private sector. So,
All
a
right,
little
I'm here for it.
awesome. I love it. I love it. I love the excitement. I love it's contagious. So, um,
All good.
before we jump into some of the questions that we talked about beforehand, you mentioned that the reason that you're here in the US is because of your family who used to serve in the military. Can you give us some background on that?
Sure. A lot of them are actually still serving. I have a lot of uncles in the military, and aunts as well. And the reason why we're here is because my aunt was in the army, and then she started, taking all of us from the Philippines. I was one of the last few people to come in. So that's why when you asked me to join you on this episode, I guess, of your podcast, I was excited too. It's just feels like a very little thing I can do in return.
Well, we really, really appreciate it. And, thank you for your family service. So let's go ahead and jump in. I think the
Okay.
first question that we want to respond to is something that sounds simple, but is anything but.
Okay.
And it's how to tell your story on a resume. There's all these different templates out there and all these, influencers on social media who say do this and do that, or don't do that
Mm-hmm.
and don't do that. And it can make it really, really confusing. Obviously, I have, my own business and I recommend certain things, but it's not about me today. It's about listening to you and your experiences and having reviewed hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of resumes at
Yikes. Yeah.
Amazon and AWS and other places, you know, um, I really want to hear from you on what really stands out to you when you're reviewing a resume and what do you look for
Mhm.
when sourcing for a particular role?
Okay, absolutely. Um, I always tell people that the resume is the marketing product that they have out there. And the thing that makes a difference, especially in tech, it's very data driven, is when I see a resume that leverages measurable metrics on there. This is a universal concept. I know everybody talks about this, as you say, but specifically for folks transitioning from government to private, I have a few tips. The first thing is the first key thing is to translate your achievements, for example, military achievements into metrics, breaking down your military successes into quantifiable accomplishments. Like, did you lead a squad of 20 soldiers, or did you reduce supply costs by 15%? Did you, Eric, you can correct me if I'm just saying things that are not accurate, but did you complete 100 plus successful missions? Or, I mean, these figures if I'm reading through that, it will tell a compelling story to me and other hiring managers, I can imagine. I love seeing if you were instrumental in a project that increased efficiency by 25%. Like, I would love to see that success. You should share that. It definitely adds color to the resume. And not only that, I mean, these numbers it provides a tangible proof of your skills. And that's what it's all about, right? You have to prove that you can do the job that you're applying for. So, yep. So
I love
figures.
it. I love it. You're speaking my language. This is exactly what I recommend that people do, and this is the way that I approach resume writing, because I tell people you have to know who your audience is. You know, and for most people, unless you're going into a clear job or you just happen to get lucky with whoever's on the other end and they have a background in the military or wherever you're coming from, most people will not know how to translate your extremely specialized technical experience. And, you know, I really harp on it that job descriptions are almost worthless, because it doesn't allow the hiring manager and the recruiter to really differentiate your experience from someone else's. You know, only the use of measurable metrics do, in my opinion. But I would love to hear, like, you know, what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of job requirements, you do have to align your metrics with the job requirements. So you look at a job posting, it says it seeks leadership and efficiency. So on your resume, you should focus on metrics that prove those abilities. Improving a process that saved time, leading a team that consistently met deadlines. Like, just highlight those numbers. Growth indicators are important. Or of course, unless it's the opposite, then you decrease it, it's positive. So just figures that add substance to your story. I love seeing that. That's extremely important.
I think what I meant was, you know, if someone is working in an ops manager role in the private sector or even in the military, if you just copy and paste your job description into your resume, that has little to no value. And so, you know, I always tell my candidates, or even people who don't work with me but just meet with me on a consultation basis, is that resumes are usually made up of two things. They're measurable metrics and they're stories. And so the metrics are, you know, the manage 15 direct reports, oversee a $10,000 budget, something like that, versus a story where, you know, you kind of alluded to it with, here's the problem, here was the solution that I put into place, and here was the measurable outcome. You know, because let's get a really good sense of, how did you approach this? What was your approach to problem solving, critical thinking, you know, et cetera. And from a hiring manager perspective, I really like to see that, because it allows me to imagine that person in the role that I'm hiring for, and potentially correlating their value to my requirements. But I love to hear it. Is there anything else about telling your story on a resume that really stands out to you, or that you think is a best practices approach?
Sure. It's I have to say, I've read more than or thousands of really, it's just a dry list of their past duties. And I always say that resume should be a snapshot of what you've accomplished. Like I said, you can picture the person in the jobs. Like, if you tell me you led a team, that's great on the resume. If you tell me you've led a team of 15 on 5 successful projects, now I'm seeing you at that role. So it's just to reiterate, bring those numbers into your cover letter, even especially into your interviews, and it can really set you apart. It's something I would definitely look for when I'm looking at a resume.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, you know, I work with a lot of salespeople, and, you know, sales is all about metrics.
Yes.
And, you know, it's how you drive value. And I see it all the time where they're like, hey, I grossed X, I reduced this by 35%. And I always tell them, well, you're missing the context. You know, like, what was the original number from that 35% reduction? You know, was it 1,000 or was it 100,000? Because that makes a big difference, you know, and it really helps to show the scope of what someone has done. And that can be really, really important when you're talking about a very comprehensive role, like, you know, for example, wearing one hat versus wearing multiple hats.
Yes.
You know, and, you know, like I said, this is not meant to be a, this isn't a one size fits all approach. This is really, really customized to every single person and every single company, but what we're talking about here is more of a best practices, consistent approach to resume writing and ensuring that your experience is properly translated.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely. And it's always unfortunate too if folks just keep thinking about just putting metrics in there and then you talk to them in person. For example, I would read increased let's say sales by 120%, and then I asked them on the interview, they started with zero. So of course it has to be actual successes, again, signs of growth. That's what we want to see.
I love it. I love it. Anything else from a resume writing perspective that you want to talk about?
I think, yeah, I think that's it for me right now on the metric side. That's really what's important for me,
awesome.
especially when reading resumes.
Okay, awesome. Let's jump.
Oh,
I know
excuse me, Eric.
Go.
Now that I'm remembering, sorry about this, but now I'm remembering one thing that actually I just remembered on a resume that I saw earlier on. It would also be great to, because typically developers do this, they include certifications but one resume I saw just this afternoon, it included relevant training metrics, like not just if you've completed any course, also the number of hours spent or the ranking you achieved, especially if it aligns with the role you're looking for. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I that's something I dive into because, when you're transitioning from the government, your rank structure is pretty structured and it's pretty set.
Right.
And again, this is kind of wading a little bit more into the gray area when you're writing a resume, but I think sometimes it's important to really try to find the corporate equivalent of what your military rank would be. And even more so, what really drives a job title and total compensation in the private sector is not really your job title, it's what you do. It's the scope and complexity of your job duties. And, like, for example, I work for, a major financial institution, and my job title that I was hired for is information security specialist, which, but I have built and I lead an enterprise global exercise program for 90,000 people and numerous business units, which
that's amazing.
I think most people would say doesn't really align to information security specialist. It more aligns to a senior manager or maybe a director role, depending on complexity. But that's one example of how, in the private sector, when you're looking at, is this a good fit for me? It's not necessarily about the job title. It's about what they want you to do. And go ahead.
I don't actually, when I source people, I look at people on LinkedIn. I don't even use job titles anymore as a filter because sometimes people get creative. It's a funny job title, and I don't want to miss out on those folks. So yes, it's the skills. I read through the content of the resume instead of what the job title is, because in every company, even on teams and different companies, there's different job titles and tiers and all that stuff. So
absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and jump into actually, this conversation made me think of something else that I want to address that isn't on our little list. So I hope you'll give me a little bit of grace, but usually when, you get invited to a screening phone call, which is that first step in the process. And if you're interviewing for a fairly professional company that has a more mature interview or hiring process, you walk into that, the recruiter says, "Hey, so happy you're here. Here's an overview of the position. Now let's jump into compensation. Here's the range or the price that we offer. Are you okay with that?" And ultimately that's how we all want the process to go. But we also get a lot of companies and recruiters who are like, "What do you want to make?" And they put the impetus on the candidate. And so when candidates come to that bridge, if you will, on, oh, well, now they're asking me what I want to make and how do I answer this question, what advice would you give to them?
One of the best answers I've ever received on that question was, with me asking the candidate, although I always want to make sure with respect to their time and mine as well, to give them the range. Even our application form, I put that in there just to reiterate what the range is and if they're comfortable. But in those cases where the recruiter is tight-lipped about the range and want to, as you say, ask the candidate what the range is, one of the best answers I've ever received was, as per my research, the market value in this location, with my skill set, this is the range that I saw on my. So that was absolutely like, I wanted to interview that person right away, because that showed they did their research, they did their homework, not just a quick Google search, like they dug into the specific of the role, because it was a couple of sentences of an answer instead of just a list of numbers. They looked at the industry, they looked at the location. I'm trying to remember if they even put the source in, but maybe I'm imagining that right now. But that was a wonderful answer. So if that's the case, if that's still happening right now with a lot of recruiters, I would suggest you be ready even before you talk to someone, and look through, do your research.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the frustrating things about job titles, is sometimes job titles are so inconsistent across the private sector, meaning one company titles a job one way and another one titles one a different way, but they're really the same job. And so that can make researching and doing market research and, pay scale or any site that you use to really determine, well, what should I be asking for, kind of difficult to interpret. Would you ever recommend throwing the question back on the recruiter? Meaning that, usually before you approve a rec, you have to approve what the base is based upon market research, cost of living. So would you ever recommend just saying, well, respectfully, you guys have already done the research, so what's the budgeted range,
So in those cases, I would always suggest that they say, I want to respect your time and mine. So what is the range that you're looking for? It is kind of a funny dance. I cannot imagine, especially with wage transparency nowadays, that the recruiter won't give it if the candidate actually asks. And at the same time, you're right. Before you even start a job posting, the salary range has already been established. And if the candidate is over that, you go back to the hiring manager and say, here's the profile. What do you think? Maybe 5,000, 10,000, 20, whatever more. But those are like, edge cases. There is already an established range. Typically, it's like a 30,000 difference. So,
absolutely.
It's worth a shot asking them. But I think the best way to get around that is to know what your minimum is. Like, this is the absolute minimum. I cannot go beyond this based on, lifestyle or like circumstances and things to that effect. So be ready for that as well.
That's exactly what I tell people as well is, if you get backed into a corner, and they're just not giving you the information for whatever reason, then just give them the minimum plus or minus 30K, give them a nice wide range, and allow them to say, well, that's either not what we're looking for, or, okay, that's acceptable to us, and, there's a lot of different reasons why I think recruiters could approach it from that perspective. Maybe they're not very experienced. Maybe the hiring processes at a company just aren't very mature. There's a lot of different, reasons we could throw out there, but, it does happen, and I know it happens quite a bit based upon the conversations that I have. And so just really want to give people a sense of, hey, how should I approach this and stuff like that. So I really appreciate your feedback.
Yeah. And it's also important to note that if you give out a number, I mean, if it's negotiable to you, do tell them that. Like, you can say, I'm not just looking at the salary. I want to look into the benefits, bonuses, if any, other perks like remote work, for example. That seems like a almost priceless thing nowadays. So you want to tell them that you are willing to negotiate your entire package, not just a paycheck.
Right.
Like, think of it as a full compensation pie, not just one slice of it. So
Right.
that's what I would say to the recruiter as well. If you feel like you're going to deter them from continuing with you, because you've put in a base salary that may or may not be within their range.
I think it's also important to recognize that when you're in that pre-screening call, except in rare circumstances where the company has done a really fantastic job at filling out the job rec, all you have to go off of is that initial job description. And
Yes.
speaking from my experience, as I've gone through various hiring processes with the hiring manager and other people who are participating, I have learned, oh, well, there's additional responsibilities that were not reflected on the original job description. And all of that's going to change how you approach total compensation. And
Yes.
so I think it's important to say on that call, I would like to have this as a base, but I'm also cognizant that my total compensation may change based upon the interviews that I have.
Right.
And
Right.
like I said, it's unfortunate that we had to do this little dance, where we qualify things, but it's we're doing it for a reason,
Yeah.
So
The one thing I would not recommend is actually not saying any number when you get screened and say, oh, I want to talk to people first and then I'll figure it out, because there's been instances where you would never want to be in a situation where you are 3 interviews in, you're about to make an offer, and then turns out they're $100,000 more than the budget. Like, the numbers have to be hashed out at the very beginning. I really believe that, or else you just waste everybody's time. It's a heartache, all that stuff. So
yeah, I could not agree more. Awesome. Well, hey, I really appreciate your feedback on that. I feel like we got a lot answered.
okay.
Let's go ahead and jump into LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is this, source of confusion for a lot of people on how recruiters approach sourcing, whether they're using LinkedIn Recruiter or whether they can't afford it and they're just using LinkedIn in general. So can you talk us through, when you're searching for a candidate, like if you're doing a proactive search on LinkedIn Recruiter and you're looking for maybe a passive candidate, you're looking for an active candidate, whatever the case may be, how do you approach that search? How are you building your search, like the keywords, the skills, all the information that you're looking for? How do you approach that? Can you give us like a peek behind the window, if possible?
Yeah, sure. It is about the keywords. I start with the keywords that match the skills and the role I'm after. Like, are you a JavaScript wizard? Do you have experience in website monitoring? That's what I'm typing into the search bar for the standard LinkedIn. It's actually handy. I use that a lot as well. But yes, when I need to dig deeper and be more hyper focused or place or more precise in my search, I do turn to LinkedIn Recruiter. It's a very advanced tool and, well, more expensive. And you can find people based on their skills, not just one or two. Like, you can do a search string on a list of skills. It could be set how many skills you want to put in there, and it would have to show, or you would be shown a list of profiles that all those skills show up. Even past roles, like we were talking about job titles earlier on, you can do a search where you can put in, they might be a list of these other job titles that's typical for this type of role, specific companies that they work for. Let's say you want to recruit people from AWS, that's another filter there too. And so if I'm after a full stack engineer in Python and Django and React, for example, with experience with website monitoring, used to work for one of the competitors, I can use LinkedIn Recruiter to find exactly that. So yeah, it's awesome. So that's why it is important that you fill, like, for example, first off, fill out that LinkedIn profile. It's amazing how many profiles are actually blank. It doesn't tell me anything, and at the same time, it's not your LinkedIn profile will not be grabbed by the LinkedIn Recruiter tool, so you won't be showing to the recruiter. Use those keywords for the jobs you're targeting. So it's good to look at a couple of job descriptions as well. And again, like your resume, add some numbers in there. And it's not just keywords for skill set as well. Like I also like putting words there like, leadership, led a team, innovation, just soft skills as well. And sometimes they pop up too on recommendations on a LinkedIn profile. I've been noticing that as well. When you just search for keywords, they pop up like, and I love seeing that because the more that pops up on your LinkedIn recommendations, the more I'm thinking, hey, this person's legit. They really are. They have these qualities. They're really a leader, etc. So that's yeah.
I love it. I couldn't agree more with the keywords and the skills. But one of the questions that even I have is, obviously LinkedIn gives you 50 skills that you can have on your profile. That they've recently in the past year allowed you to put up to 5, if not more, under each job that you've had to really highlight, which skills those jobs are aligned to. But how do you know, beyond looking at the job descriptions, how do you know what skills to actually put on your profile? Because, LinkedIn gives you a list. Like if I typed in crisis management would pop up. But if I typed in another one that wasn't on the LinkedIn list, it would give me a lowercase answer. And so how do I know?
A lowercase answer?
Like meaning like LinkedIn already has a preset list of skills on their skills list, if you will.
Okay.
But if it's not on there, then you'll still be able to type it in. It just won't be recognized as a LinkedIn skill. And so what I'm curious about is how do we, if we're targeting, a senior manager for investigations or whatever the case may be, how do we really identify, well, what skills are the recruiters actually typing into LinkedIn Recruiter? How do I make sure that the skills on my profile are actually the ones that other people are using to source for jobs?
Yeah, I would really start off with a job description and make sure at the very least, all the tech skills that's on there, because that's the first thing that recruiters would put in on the search is the tech skills, because that's typically like the basic requirement. So I'd go through, that's why it is important a lot of times or all the time. And I know people hate hearing this, is to customize your resume, because in order for the applicant tracking system to grab your resume, again, like LinkedIn Recruiter, the recruiter will type in some keywords or the ATS will rank your relevance to the job description. You have to have the right keywords there. So go to the job posting, make sure all the skill sets there. Sometimes I have special ones that they put in there, certifications, make sure it's on your resume. And then, that's the surefire way of making sure that it's on there.
Well,
I mean, that's your visible.
You opened the door. So now we're going to walk through it on ATS. So let's dispel the misconceptions that exist out there about ATS. What is ATS? How does it function within the HR and the application process? And really, most importantly, how do you use it as a recruiter?
Right. What's amazing is a lot of people talk about ATSs like it's one thing and it does the same thing. Okay, I mean, there's basic things that an ATS does that has like all of ATSs has in common, but it doesn't work the same. Like, for example, there are ATSs that, like I said earlier, when let's say you receive 50 applications, you can filter through how based on the relevance of the resume on the job description or on the keywords that a recruiter would preset. So that's actually the tool that the ATS that we use right now. I would put preset keywords that I know this job would really need. And then when I look through my applicants, the first people I see there, it's not based on who applied first, second, third, whoever. It's based on how closely matching the resume is on the keywords that I put in there. And of course, you have to read through it because we do know some people, amazingly, like those advice about keyword stuffing and stuff like that. If it doesn't make sense, if it's just word salad, I mean, I would reject the candidate and even tag the candidates That's another thing that people don't realize is the ATS is a CRM. So people see what you've done there, the roles you've applied for. When I was at AWS and Amazon, I would see people applying to 500 plus jobs in 6 months. And, I guess you could say, okay, they're really trying hard, but no, not really. There's no 500 jobs that are the same jobs that are posted at Amazon. And so it's obvious they're just spamming the system, sending it, and they don't know that recruiters can see that on the other end. Oh my God, I don't know if this candidate has a lot of attention to detail. Are they really discriminatory about or discriminating about how they're applying to jobs and whether it's a good fit for them. So that's unfortunate a lot of times. And there's even filters where, like, for example, for big databases like that, where you can filter as to how many applications they've had in the past. So I would really caution people on not just spamming, especially the bigger companies, because it's visible. So that's one reminder. It's all ATSs. They are CRMs. You would see when they applied before. You would see even, there's a lot of spam applications as well. It's tough. That's why you need ATSs where people would change their names and then it's the same type of resume. It's like from, an agency somewhere, for example, they're trying to game the system. So it's just, it's important to be very cognizant of that and I'm missing the word, like, just really think through if this is the job that's a good fit for your
Don't just
skill set.
spray and pray.
Hit apply. Exactly.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. For example, I would show a resume to a hiring manager and say, hey, this candidate applied for this role, and then the hiring manager would see, why did they apply to this completely different role? And so they would doubt, like, the focus of the candidate, like, are they really an expert in this particular job if they are applying to different types, like completely different types of jobs as well. So yeah, be very, very careful.
I
would say that to candidates.
That's great feedback. Well, how about rejections as it aligns to ATS? Like, does the ATS actually have the power to reject candidates?
Yes.
What if you apply over the weekend and you get a response back in 5 minutes? Like, what happened there? Can you give us some feedback on that?
Again, it's how the job posting is set up. There's ATSs, or actually practically all of them, I'm sure, where you would put in a yes or no question. For example, let's say you're recruiting for a role that has to just be based in the US, and then you would still get international candidates, especially for my company, we're fully remote and global, but some roles you have to stay in a particular location. And so I would put in on the ATS that if the question is there, are you currently located in the US, for example, and they answered no, then it is an automatic rejection. That is just fair because, of course, if I don't have that filter and I have 500 applications and only 50 of them are from the US, then, that's that's not very efficient at all.
Right.
So yeah, or it could be like maybe visa sponsorship needs, or even salary ranges. Like, they would put in a drop down. You'd think, okay, they're just, asking, like, wanting to know what my salary expectations are. But then it's already a preset thing there that if it's more than this, it's an automatic rejection. So yeah, levels. There's like ATS is, it's an automation tool.
I love it. This is insightful for me too, because the process is constantly changing, and it varies by company. And so I think it's really important for people to keep in mind that, what you're talking about is your experience, but it's not how every company approaches the hiring process. And so,
of course,
every single job application should be approached in a different way. You shouldn't expect the same results from one company versus another. And from people who are, especially from the federal government, who have been so used to USA jobs, that
Oh,
allows you to apply to numerous agencies using a singular application. That
ah,
can be really difficult for people to understand, is that,
mhm.
oh, well, you mean the HR process is different over here, and I had to expect something just completely different? It's just different for people to, come to terms with in some respects. But you definitely provided a lot of great feedback on that front. Um,
Yeah.
how about, let's jump into a little bit about interviewing.
Okay.
So once we make it past the pre-screen process, and either we go into the one-on-one interviews, or in big tech we jump into a loop or something like
hmm
that. um,
hmm
how should people approach the interview process?
Yeah. I always say this, and I know some people don't like it when I say it, but it's 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 a two-way conversation. So the way what I do right now is, even before talking to a candidate, I actually tell them of that. When they schedule an interview with me, even before that, I send them our company values, and then when they schedule, I send them interview tips to maximize the 30 minutes or what have you that we have together. But one of the reminders are put in there is it's a two-way conversation. It's not just a Q&A section. It's more like a first date with the company. Both sides are sizing each other up. And there's a few key things that I also suggest to my candidates before I even talk to them. First is the absolute first is you do have to know the company as much as you can. What's their mission? What are they passionate about? In tech, understanding their product or service, it sets you apart. If you can believe it, I mean, you'd be surprised at how many people I've interviewed at my current company that don't even know what we do. Like, I understand recruiters do have to pitch the role as well in the company, but if you're applying you're actually invited to an interview. It's not, you're given a couple of days maybe, or, at least 24 hours before that call. There's really no excuse not to even look at the company you're talking to, because where's the interest there? And then the second thing is talking about, or the role itself. Break the job description down, look at the key responsibilities, start connecting the dots with your background, especially for you folks, in the government sector, transitioning, like connect the dots with that background. How do your leadership skills, like that discipline, that problem solving mindset, how does that translate to the job description that you're looking for? So that's another thing I suggest as well. And this is probably, I do wish a lot of people do this more often. And it's the most important thing for an interview is practicing your stories for your story. So you look at the company, you look at the job description, you think about how you would convince the person interviewing you that you're a fit for the company and the responsibilities. So really, you should expect to articulate how your experience prepared you for the role, prepare the stories. I When I was at AWS, I would like have sessions with my candidates and have them tell me their stories beforehand, based on Amazon leadership principles, because I do want them to practice as well. Prepare, then practice. I would suggest, for especially for folks from government, maybe they should practice with the friend or family member, especially someone who's not familiar with the terminology. Because on interviews, I've interviewed folks from the military, where they were, they were saying words that I wasn't able to understand, and I have to have them keep repeating. Like, you'd have to. The status quo is that you'd be talking to someone without that background, and you
Right.
have to make sure they understand that as well. So,
Absolutely. Yeah,
mhm.
definitely a two-way street. Definitely, if you are given the opportunity to ask questions, please
Mm,
have a couple ready to go.
yeah.
You know, that's huge. It shows that you have interest, but also shows that you've thought about this, that you've researched.
What questions do you usually suggest, Eric?
Oh man, I always think about like, especially if I'm talking to the hiring manager,
Mhm.
especially, then I always ask, what are your expectations in the first 90 days? You know,
Right.
how would I measure success over a 30, 60, 90-day plan? You know,
Hmm.
because I really want to know, am I the best fit for this? Because if he says, well, at the end of the 90 days, I would expect you to do this, then I can
Hmm.
bring up an example from my background that aligns to what
Absolutely.
he or she said, you know,
Yeah.
and every single word that is coming out of my mouth as a candidate is being analyzed by whoever's on the other end as,
Hmm.
does this person not only have the skills to do this job, but do they have the temperament too? Are
Yeah.
they able to get along with people? You know, could I see them interacting with a team based upon their communication style, based upon their personality? You know, and I tell people all the time, your qualifications or your resume gets you in the door, but
Hmm.
usually it's your ability to, you know, assimilate into the culture and the
Hmm.
environment successfully that have a large part to play in getting the job, because a lot of people have the skills but they don't necessarily have the ability to, you know, function within the team environment that is present in that
Hmm.
specific area. You know, and ultimately as a hiring manager you really want someone who's going to stay for as long as possible and contribute as much value as possible. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
that's, go ahead.
Oh, back at AWS and eat like I've had people go through coding exercises, and I always tell them I've had very successful candidates who don't even complete the coding exercise. The reason for that is they want to first check if you're the type of person who will just jump into implementation without planning, thinking, being strategic. Second, are you collaborating well with the person interviewing you? Are you listening to their feedback? Are you even asking for their feedback? They want to hear your thought processes. Did you consider other alternatives, for example? So you're right. It's especially for cases like that, people get super worried about coding exercises, especially the team. But a lot of that is not even the technical prowess per se, because everybody knows if you're a good developer, for example, you'll learn whatever language it is, the framework, what have you, but it's the soft skills that's hard, and the culture, the not just culture fit, but the culture add that you would be um, bringing into the company as well. Those are things that's, not quantifiable, but you get that as you go through these exercises.
You know, one thing that I always ask too, regardless of who it is there anything in my background that gives you pause? Or is there
Mm.
anything that I haven't said that is a integral part of this job? Because I really want to ensure that they have a full understanding of what I bring to the table, both good and
Sure.
not necessarily what they're looking for. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I want to have the opportunity to answer all of their questions, you know, because whether they go with me or not, that's going to give them the ability to really make a really informed decision about whether I'm the right fit for them or not. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, at the end of the day, like you said, you know, that initial call is the first date, and then you go through this courtship, you know, with the
Yes.
company, if you will. And at the end of the day, no, in my opinion, at least, no interview is ever a waste of time. You know, you're, even if
It's
you don't get
practice too.
selected for the role, you're
Mm-hmm.
practicing, you're building
Mm-hmm.
relationships with potential people that you might work with down the road. I mean, so much good can come from just participating in interviews.
Oh yeah, and I don't have the number on top of my head right now, but like second place people immediately an opening pops up, you remember this person, the hiring manager comes to you, hey, I interviewed them for this role, they weren't a good fit, now we're opening a junior role or a different, they were more geared towards this skill set. So yes, you're right, it's definitely not a waste, and you are there doing a great job is always the key here, because again, the ATS is a CRM, your skills, whatever have you, how you presented yourself is going to be noted and documented. So it's important that, you still do a good showing no matter what.
Absolutely. And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I coach people on is on LinkedIn, if you click on the jobs tab, and then there's a toolbar on the left-hand side that is called interview prep. And if you click on it, there's a list of the top 26 most commonly asked questions that you might experience in the interview process. And there's all of these different categories among all these very generic job titles that you can look at. And obviously it depends on whether you have premium or not, but you can look at sample answers. You can look at frameworks that are 1 to 2 minutes in length, talking about how to approach every single question. And I love it because for the most part, this is free. And you get a chance to see all of these very, very common questions that I can personally attest I've been asked on almost every single interview. And it really just helps you build confidence in how you're going to answer the questions, but it also kind of gives you some ideas on how to approach it. Because one of the biggest issues that people who are coming out of the government experience is they may be a fantastic interviewer, but one thing they've never had to do is translate their specialized government experience into the corporate sector. And so this tool, while not perfect by any means, allows you to have a baseline on, well, if I got asked to tell me about yourself, or what's your greatest, or what's your greatest weakness. Yeah, exactly. Or, what are your salary expectations, whatever the case may be. It starts to reorient your mindset on, oh, I might get asked this. How would I respond? Well, what are other people saying? And it's just a really good way just to kind of get prepared for some of these questions. So
yeah, I like it seems like the easiest and toughest question for candidates is, give me a brief background of your experience. And when the candidate starts with, when I was in high school, it's, please do not go that far back. And also, I would always suggest it's highlight your skills and expertise or achievements. Don't go, I did this. I went to this company A, company B, I stayed there. Like, I don't need that story. I can't get anything from it. And I can also see that on your resume. So what I'm asking for is, what is your edge? How are you a good fit for the role that I'm looking for? So, I mean, I also preface our conversation with, we have 30 minutes for this call. And so I hope you don't mind if I try to manage our conversation. If I feel like I'm getting the information already, I hope you don't mind if I interrupt you. And that's something I learned at Amazon and at AWS. Like, the interviewers are told to make sure to do that, because there's a list of questions. You want to make sure you get asked all these questions so the interviewer can get all these data points, and not just, you being long-winded and getting asked 2 questions versus the 7 actual questions that you needed to have been asked. So people do have to be concise, and especially hiring managers would be very sensitive if a candidate is super long-winded, especially if they're going to be customer facing. If this candidate cannot be concise, I don't want them representing my company to my customers. So that's something people have to take note of. So be ready. That's the easiest way to do it. So you don't laugh too much.
I think it's also worth noting that it's okay to fail. Yes. It's okay to not get selected. It's okay to, hey, you're not a good fit for us. It sucks. Let's just be real. It's a tough thing to go through. But as you gain additional experience and as you go through additional interviews, your confidence will increase, and you'll start to realize, I can do this. Or, hey, they're looking for that. And so while I didn't necessarily provide that information the first time I was asked, now I know better. And the one thing to also keep in mind is always send thank you notes.
Gosh.
I know we can't ever hope to get everything that we want in this one podcast, but thank you notes are such an easy thing to do following the conclusion of the interview. And you may not have the hiring manager's email, but you have the recruiter's email, and so you can send them one, they will pass it along. And, A, it's professional, but B, it gives you a chance to just show up on their radar one more time, and they can see, oh, this person is really invested. And it's just a really important thing to do, in my opinion.
Yeah, I 30 interviews, 50 interviews, I probably would get one. So now I've started thanking them for our interview, and then I now get emails back. And the best candidates that send the thank you notes are the ones that actually look at our product even and have feedback about it. Those are almost immediate hires for us, for my
Yeah,
company.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I know we're approaching a couple more minutes to the end,
Okay.
but is there anything else that you think you want to impart to our audience? Any other, feedback, advice, best practices, anything at all?
I know we didn't touch salary negotiation, but there's two things
Feel
I
free.
want to highlight there. The first thing is um, it shouldn't, it's oh gosh, now I'm losing. If they offer something below what you're expecting, don't panic, don't take it personally. It's just an opening move to a chess game. You can counter offer. And the second thing is don't negotiate just for the sake of negotiating. If they hit your target, if it feels right, it's okay to accept. Like not every negotiation needs to end with a counter offer. Oh, and the third one, it's a conversation and not a confrontation. That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
So
I
salary
couldn't
negotiations,
agree
that's what I
more.
always say.
I couldn't agree more. Definitely, if it's low and just remember, it's not always about base too. Total compensation means a
Yep.
lot of things to different people depending on the company and what, it could be performance bonuses, sign-on bonuses, equity grants or refreshers, whatever the case may be, there's a lot that goes into it. But if you don't like it or you want to counter or something like that, it's okay to do that as long as it's in a respectful and a professional way.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
But
And it takes practice too.
Yeah, and just like you mentioned, if it hits your target, don't feel a need to well, I want more. I mean, if they give you what you want, then they're saying we want you.
Right.
And so just say, hey, thank you so much. When can I start?
Yeah.
So, well, hey, Czarina, great talking with you. This has been a fantastic way just to catch up, but also to talk about a lot of misconceptions in the HR process and hopefully give people some really, really good feedback on how to approach their own job search process. So
I hope so too.
I really, really appreciate your time and thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast.
Thanks, Eric. It was my pleasure.
All right.
Bye.
Have a great day.
You too.